Hello, welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We've got Ray Fittipaldo on, and I want to talk about Omar Khan in his first 2 years. We're going to do a review of the moves that he's made to help better the Steelers in some areas, where he could be better, and what he still needs to do after his first 2 seasons as the Steelers GM. We talk about that and look if the Steelers still need to invest in that offensive line moving forward. All here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Let's get into it.
You are now listening to the North Shore Drive Podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter.
Hello, welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Ray Fittipaldo, one of our great Steelers beat writers. And as always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube, like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of those Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes, as well as the daily content that comes out from our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And reminder that this show is always brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. Whether you're injured in a car accident or hurt on the job, Edgar Snyder Associates has helped injury victims for over 40 years recover more than $2 billion on their behalf. If you or a loved one have been seriously injured in an accident, call 1-800-94-EDGAR or visit www.edgarsnyder.com for a free consultation. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Ray, let's talk about Omar Khan, because everyone's going to be wondering, who is he looking at? He's going to talk to us at the Combine at some point this next week. But everyone's been looking at, okay, who are the Steelers going to go after this year? But in his first 2 years, they've tried to make investments in the areas that have not been going, that didn't go well at the end of Kevin Colbert's tenure. And there's been some draft picks that I think you can say have been hits so far. But there's also been draft picks you're still waiting to see, will they blossom into being top tier starters as being those early picks. How do you grade, or how do you look at the early 2 years of Omar Khan's tenure as the Steelers general manager?
Yeah, I think, overall, I think Omar has done a really good job. We can break it down both, draft and then free agency. I think, his first draft, we're still waiting on the top 2 guys to really become the players that the Steelers think they can be. That would be Broderick Jones and Joey Porter. One was taken number 14 overall. The other was taken number 32 overall. That's like having 2 first-round picks. And unfortunately for the Steelers, Jones hasn't played to his draft slot. And I thought Joey Porter, this past season, probably took a little bit of a step back. I thought he was okay as a rookie, maybe even a little bit above average. And then he took a step back in his second season. So those 2 guys are going to have to pan out. But there's been some mid-round gems. You get Nick Herbig in that same draft. If you spin it forward to this past year, you get 2 bona fide cornerstones to your offensive line, and Zach Frazier, and I think Troy Fautanu, if he can stay healthy. And then you get Payton Wilson with a compensatory third-round pick. I think that guy is going to be a really good player for them, for their defense for a long time. So I think draft-wise, yeah, we're still waiting on Porter and Jones to step up. But I think overall they've done a really good job in their first 2 drafts. And, obviously all eyes are going to be on them over the next couple of weeks as we lead up to their third draft.
I think a lot of Steelers fans, when they're like, well, what does it matter what he's done? They still haven't won a playoff game. But I look at these first 2 drafts and also the free agent side, which we'll get to in a bit. But one thing I think Omar Khan has done is he's at least found answers in certain positions that have upgraded those spots while other positions started to fall off. Cornerback hasn't been revolutionized, but Joey Porter Jr. is at least solid out there. And if Joey Porter Jr. wasn't solid, this team would be like, imagine this team with like the Antoine Blake and the Artie Burns and the, Cody Sensabaugh years. This would have been even worse of a situation for the Steelers right now. And at least Porter and Donte Jackson were okay for most of the year. And that's not what you want at the end of the day. You want to have that you drafted Joey Porter Jr. in the first pick of the second round in 2023 for him to be, a top tier guy. But you also, you recognize you developed those guys. But getting Zach Frazier was such a big help this year. We've seen the Steelers struggle mightily at center since they lost Marquise Pouncey to retirement. Payton Wilson being added at linebacker, not to mention the free agent picks there. And we'll go over the free agent picks in the next segment. But, they've found guys that can at least be, solid veterans on the team, or solid, starters on the team and contributors on the team who could still develop into being more than solid. Guys like you said, Broderick Jones, Joey Porter Jr., Keeanu Benton, they're getting a lot of snaps and a lot of playing time for the Steelers. Even Darnell Washington, who I think fits in that category. And then Nick Herbig came off the bench, and we still didn't get to see the first round pick or the first third round pick this year in Fautanu or Roman Wilson this season. Mason McCormick even got significant starting time, and he had some up and down games. But for a fourth round pick to start that many games in his rookie season, I think it shows that there's potential there. There's youth into the Steelers organization again. And, I'd say that if they didn't hit as much as they did in these first two drafts, as far as guys who can contribute right away, this team probably would have fallen off a bit of a cliff already.
Yeah, and I think he's done it his way. He was a longtime lieutenant under Kevin Colbert, but when he got the job, Chris, he changed pretty much all the scouting staff. He brought in his guys, a lot of the guys who work for the Steelers and Kevin Colbert for years and years and years are no longer with the organization. So he's doing it in a different way. And like, how many GMs would do what he did, where you get rid of the 1 year, you get rid of all of your inside linebackers, you revamp that room with free agents and draft picks, and then he did it with quarterbacks too. He pretty much tore down the whole quarterback room, and then he built that back up this past season when he brought on Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, and of course Kyle Allen as the number 3. So he hasn't been afraid to tinker with the roster, and I think it was needed. You go back, there were some problems, with the salary cap and the COVID year, and that kind of, hampered Kevin Colbert in his final years in the draft. But the point is, major renovations were needed, and I think Omar, to the best of his ability, given the circumstances, has tried to, make those overhauls and make them work.
And the thing is, I think that, the big part of the overhaul, especially with the offensive line, is these are all draft picks that are still very young. Broderick Jones just finished his second year. Zach Frazier, Mason McCormick are rookies. Troy Fautanu, a rookie that didn't play. So, you're looking at 4 investments into the offensive line, 4 who are, could be starters next year, for the Steelers. That doesn't turn into things overnight. You saw the development of guys like Marquise Pouncey and David DeCastro over the years. Those guys didn't turn into, an overnight stud offensive line either. It took them time. And Marquise Pouncey came out the gate firing on all cylinders in 2010, right. But David DeCastro, not as much. Marcus Gilbert, not as much. And it took time for them to coalesce and become a dominant offensive line, the dominant offensive line that we knew through most of the 2010s for the Steelers. But it took some time to get there. I think that's where the Steelers are at right now. Like, they see the potential for guys. Zach Frazier's a strong start. I think Broderick Jones is a little different because of how raw he was coming out of college versus, some of those other guys. But this is going to take a little bit of time to develop. But if this turns into, the Steelers' next dominant era of an offensive line, one, they're going to be closer to being the team that they wanted to be, like the Eagles, when it comes to comparing to Andy Weidel, and where that is. But two, that's going to do so much for what this offense is. And I think that's when we'll be able to take a better look at the major investments that Omar Khan has made early in his start at GM.
Yeah, they said it from the time they took the job, Chris, both Andy and Omar. They want to be a team that is built through the trenches, and both the offensive and defensive lines needed to be rebuilt when they took over. So they did not step in to an ideal situation. They want to play a certain brand of football, and they weren't really set up to succeed, when they got those jobs. So that's been an ongoing process with the offensive line. The defensive line, I think they're really going to take a look at that this offseason. They have to, I think, both in free agency and the draft. And fortunately for them, it's a really good draft for defensive linemen. So they should be able to take a big step, forward there. And if you want to compare it to those, Pouncey, DeCastro lines, Kevin really did a good job. Like the start of that new era, like the Killer Beast era, you bring on AB in 2010, yeah, but Bell comes in 13, Bryant comes in 14, but the foundation was the offensive line, right?
Yep.
They really invested, like the Steelers have invested. And, another point about this, sometimes the high draft picks don't work out.
Right.
And you got to find lower round draft picks who do work. So I'll give you an example. Mike Adams was a second round pick in 2012. He had injuries. There were some issues there. He he never developed into the player that they were hoping he would be. But a year or two later, they get Kelvin Beachum. Beachum just turns out, 7th-round pick. The guy's still playing.
Still playing. It's
The
amazing.
guy, I mean, he was a really good player for a few years for the Steelers. He moved on in free agency, but sometimes the high picks don't work out, and the way you make up for that is you find some gems in the mid and later rounds, and we'll see if Andy and Omar can do that as well.
Certainly. I want to talk about also the other side of this, free agency, because that's the other part of trying to fill some answers there. We'll talk about some of the moves they've done there and give our thoughts on Omar Khan and how they've handled that next here on the North Shore Drive podcast and the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. If you're injured in an accident, you're probably wondering what's next. Well, for over 40 years, Edgar Snyder Associates has helped injury victims answer that very question. Whether it's gathering evidence, collecting medical records, or dealing with the insurance companies, Edgar Snyder Associates has helped over 75,000 people handle the question, what's next? Call 1-800-94-EDGAR or visit www.edgarsnyder.com for a free consultation. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. We're back here in the North Shore Drive podcast for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's talk about the Steelers free agent signings over the past few years. I think the most recent year of signing included a big splash at linebacker. You look at what they did in Patrick Queen, but that was coming off of completely flipping that room entirely around. The year before, they went and got Cole Holcomb. Granted, he got injured, and really their whole team got injured at linebacker last season. But Elandon Roberts, Cole Holcomb, Quan Alexander were brought in last season. Patrick Queen brought in this season. And linebacker is not where it was when Ryan Shazier was a stud player for the Steelers, making plays over the field. But linebacker has been such a liability for this team since then. They drafted Devin Bush, didn't work out. They've been looking for answers. And I do think that those additions plus drafting Payton Wilson has at least stabilized the position and made it solid there.
Yeah, that's a good word. That's the exact word I was going to use. They were down for so many years there, bringing in stopgaps. Injuries really took a toll on them, even other than Shazier. I mean, the Holcomb injury was, obviously, a year and a half it took him to get back, and he was ready to play by the end of this past season, but he never made it back. So bad luck, bad drafting. It was a combination of things, but at the very least, Patrick Queen gives you a competent inside linebacker. I think he's a little bit above average. I think there's promise there that, if he can get comfortable, he can maybe even, play beyond that. And I really like the Payton Wilson pick. I know he fell in the draft because of the injuries that he sustained at North Carolina State, but you watch him move around athletically. The big plays he creates. He had that pick against Lamar Jackson that basically won them the Ravens game after Russell Wilson almost threw it away. Had that scoop and score at Cincinnati. So when you have an inside backer who's capable of making big plays like that, and he does that as a rookie, I think the future is bright for him. And I think overall, that's probably not a position they're even going to address in free agency or the draft this year. They might take a mid or a late round guy just to develop, in case Elandon Roberts doesn't come back. But I think that room is pretty much set going into the 2025 season.
I think so too. I think that's a group that you could probably feel confident that they at least have the core of that already in place. But whereas they do have to readdress the quarterback room, Omar Khan flipped that room upside down after his first season. And Ray, I mean, I guess I'd be challenging you to go back before the Roethlisberger years and think of an offseason that had as much turnover at the quarterback position as that. But I can't think of one for the life of me, because they went from Kenny Pickett's the future. This time last year when we were getting ready to head to the combine, I remember us talking at the combine with Omar Khan jokingly like, "Oh yeah, you guys aren't going to sign Russell Wilson." And then they signed Russell Wilson. Trade Kenny Pickett away. They trade for Justin Fields, and everything looks different there. And I'd say that the quarterback position was upgraded this season, maybe not in a major way, but to find those answers so quickly and to show that the Steelers are able to move on and get different production from quarterback, I think that's something that I didn't expect this front office to have to tackle at this stage.
Yeah, when you talk about the circumstances when Omar took over, it's interesting. And when Kevin Colbert left, he didn't want to leave them high and dry at the quarterback position. So they take Kenny Pickett, and they probably reached, right. And looking back, that draft class was below average. And when a QB falls to number 20 in the first round, he probably should fall out of the first round because one of those other teams would have taken him. So Kevin tried to address that on his way out. But the unfortunate thing is, if you remember, right after that draft, Kevin was done. Kevin, Omar and Andy pretty much were hired right after that. And then I don't want to say they're stuck, but they're in there with a player that they didn't necessarily draft. That was a Mike and Kevin pick, and it didn't work out for them. So now they have to address it again, and we'll see if they can do it again. We're going to be talking about that a lot next week at Indianapolis. But really, you want to talk about Omar's job performance. The biggest domino to fall that he has to get corrected is the quarterback situation. If he does that, he's going to set himself up for success. If he doesn't, there's going to be a lot of, year after year after year, who's our quarterback? And that's not a great position to be in if you're a general manager.
No, I agree. But I think there's something to be said about how the Steelers have flipped so many things around like that recently, right? Like Omar, like you look at the tail end of Kevin Colbert's career, and there aren't a lot of players that they picked high from his last 5 or 6 drafts that are still there. Like if you go back to 2017, the only first round picks who were contributing as starters to the Steelers that were in the Kevin Colbert era were Najee Harris and TJ Watt. But in 2018, Terrell Evans not with the team anyway. I mean, he was brought back briefly with the team this year, right before he got let go again. Devin Bush, they let just walk in free agency because he wasn't that good. Though he wasn't a first round pick, he was the first pick of the 2020 draft. Chase Claypool, Najee Harris was there, but Kenny Pickett on this year. So those picks, the Steelers are operating with not that many first round picks of late. That's a big hole there. But how did Omar Khan flip that? Well, he flipped Kenny Pickett into getting some compensation, and then it was able to get some help there. He flipped Chase Claypool into the pick that got them Joey Porter Jr. He's been able to get some turnaround there. He flipped Donte Jackson, who was a 3rd round pick and a signed veteran on this team, into getting Donte Jackson. And people at the time, both of us, I think, were both kind of like, okay, I guess, when that happened. But then when you see how bad Donte Jackson was everywhere he went this year because he was on 3 different teams, it was like, wow, I think the Steelers dodged one there by getting him off the team. He's done that so much in just 2 years, and flipping out all these players that the Steelers drafted and didn't work for what they were doing, and at least got players who contributed to the now on the roster.
Kevin Colbert would make a deal here and there. The Minka deal, I remember kind of even when that happened, that was like, okay, that's a little bit that's kind of rare for Kevin to do that. But he did that, and I give him credit. And he traded up to get Santonio Holmes, and he traded up to get Troy. So he wasn't averse to doing it. But if I'm looking at the biggest differences between Omar and Kevin, like Omar is involved in that stuff every year. I mean, he's wheeling and dealing. Even you mentioned the trades that went down. There were trades, the Brandon Ayuk thing. He's always been involved, and he's always trying to improve the roster. Now, people, have criticized him for not being able to get a deal done at receiver. Listen, I get it, but in the end, he did everything he could, I think, to try to get a guy at a reasonable price. It didn't work out, but I think Steelers fans, if you're worried about a guy who's just going to sit back and maybe do things the old way, that's not Omar. At the very least, Omar's going to try to shake things up and improve this roster in every single way, whether it's draft, free agency, trades. He's going to, leave every stone, unturned, trying to improve this football team.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of what you need to do, right? When you're trying to fix so many things at the same time, you got to use all the resources you have available. That's draft picks and free agent salary cap space. And look, right now the Steelers officially have $53 million in salary cap space. We talked about that on the Monday episode. They could get that up to $70 million very soon. And, even though T. Higgins is looking like he'll be off the table as the Bengals are reportedly going to franchise tag him, you look at the options that are still out there. Byron Murphy, will he get franchise tagged by the Vikings? There's rumors that might happen at cornerback, but there's answers to get there. We've talked about the potential investments on the D-line in free agency to give them a better rotation with the guys that they've invested into. All those things are part of what Omar Khan and Andy Weidel have tried to do to flip things around, kind of get back from the end of the Roethlisberger era, where they were still trying to hang on to the idea that maybe Ben Roethlisberger could be that guy. That's why they drafted Chase Claypool over, say, Jalen Hurts. It's why they drafted, guys that could be playmakers rather than new installments into the offensive line. They're in the second year of that era, and they're still finding answers. And this will be a big thing in just a couple of weeks when or I guess a little under a month now, when free agency opens up. Where do the Steelers target there? And that's one thing we're going to keep a very close eye on. One group that we think maybe they shouldn't close the book on just yet is the group that they've invested a lot into in Omar Khan's first 2 years, and that's the offensive line. Why should they still keep investing in it? We're going to talk about that next here on the North Shore Drive podcast for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by Savitas, Kane, and Gallucci. They're your mesothelioma and asbestos lawyers with over 85 years of experience. Call them today for a free consultation. That's Savitas, Kane, and Gallucci. We're also brought to you by Moon Township Honda, where you can get your new Honda vehicle at 5802 University Boulevard in Moon Township, PA, or visit their website at moonhonda.com. Here's a message from our friends at Moon Township Honda.
We gave the all-electric Prologue EX class-leading passenger space. And we made its tech intuitive with Google built-in. Perhaps that's why we were named Best Overall EV and Hybrid Brand by Kelley Blue Book. It's nice when a dream comes together. Buy online, reserve from select dealers, or visit your local Honda dealer today.
We're back here in the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, I was talking about the offensive line there. I know there's probably someone slamming something on their desk as they say, why do they still need to invest in the offensive line? Well, let's talk about that, because the Steelers presumably have their tackles for the future in Fautanu and Jones. They presumably have their center for the future in Zach Frazier. But you pointed this out in your Steelers chat the other day when you were interacting with a lot of our subscribers at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. The Steelers maybe aren't completely sold that Mason McCormick is the future just yet. Maybe he is, and maybe his rookie year was enough for them. But the guard position took a step back this year with the injury to James Daniels. Jerry Dulac has reported they're most likely not bringing him back this year. And Isaac Seumalo underperformed this year, I thought. Granted, he also suffered some injuries he could play through, but still injuries. What do you think the Steelers do, if anything, if they're going to try to fix the guard position this year?
Yeah, I mean, let's take right guard first. I do think McCormick played well enough that he's probably going to come back and, to use a Mike Tomlin phrase, be in pole position there. But I think they could very easily provide some competition for him. You could probably bring Nate Herbig back on a cheap deal. He's coming off an injury. I think Nate's a really good interior backup. So, and I think he could push Mason. It wouldn't be a situation where Mason is just walking in the second year and, automatically being a starter. I think the more likely scenario when you look at the draft, it wouldn't be at right guard. I think left guard. And, not a day one or a day two pick, I don't think. But, anytime from the fourth round on, take a shot at a guard. You're not going to re-sign Seumalo. I think when Seumalo is done after this season, I think he's going to be 32 years old. You're probably not going to bring him back on another deal. So why not try to, bring his replacement in now and have him sort of groom his replacement and, see if you can go that route. So, people are kind of putting offensive line off, saying they don't need to address it. They don't need to address it on the first 2 days, Chris, but don't be surprised if they draft a guard in, fourth, fifth. They got a couple picks in the seventh round. Don't be surprised if they take one on day 3.
No, I can see that there. Because again, the idea of when they went and got a Mason McCormick type of guy, he was like the anti Broderick Jones. Not to say he was against him, but saying that he wasn't raw. Like, he had all the experience out of South Dakota State. You know, he was coming to the Steelers with you know, being as a known physical guy, and you saw that come out at different parts of this year where he could be a mauler for the Steelers. And maybe that's the kind of guy that they're looking for, another mid-round mauler type of guy who maybe he comes into the stars, but maybe he just sits behind you know, Isaac Seumalo for a year and they develop. And then you could look at 2026 and beyond as having 5 guys on rookie deals balling out together and growing together, and then that becomes your core, or at least the, you know, the source of your nucleus moving forward. So I don't think it's totally unreasonable for the Steelers to consider it there. Now, do you invest big there? Probably not, because you want to eventually still build other parts of the team. They need, like you've been talking about, they need to rebuild the trenches on the defensive side of the ball if they want to be that team like the Eagles, because you go back to that Super Bowl, and while the Eagles offensive line was dominant, so was their defensive line, and they need to get in that position. I think they need to fix cornerback. We've talked about wide receiver. We've gone over those things, but the offensive line shouldn't be ignored now just because they've spent high in the past 2 drafts there. You know, considering that there was a time over a several-year period they didn't invest in the offensive line for pretty much a decade in the early rounds of the draft, because they were so good with what they had developed, you know, at the, you know, throughout at the start of the 2010s, and that lasted them for most of the 2010s decade. You didn't see them reinvest until you know, they got to these years that to make it start to work out.
Yeah, listen, Andy Weidel's background is as an offensive lineman. He played offensive line at Villanova. So, you know, people concentrate on him using high picks. And, you know, listen, a lot of GMs would be able to pick out the best guys in the last 2 draft classes. But I think where Andy's going to make his money is finding those late round guys, or finding those undrafted free agents, guys who can come in and maybe you develop as top backups, or maybe they become you know, a starter one day. You know, he found Nate Herbig when he was in Philadelphia. Nate Herbig was an undrafted free agent when he came out. And, you know, Herbig's now, he's probably going to go into his 6th or 7th year. So he's been obviously a very competent NFL player. And I think, you know, Andy's expertise in offensive line play, he's got some good scouts around him. He's going to have to find those types of guys now, right? Because you're not going to invest 1st and 2nd round picks in the offensive line every single year. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what Andy does. I do think at least 1 draft pick will be used on an offensive lineman here this year, or maybe a top undrafted free agent. And you know, knowing his background, we'll see if that guy works out.
We certainly will. Ray, thanks so much for joining me here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm Chris Carter, your host. You can read all of our work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Subscribe there to get all the written work there. But you can also subscribe here on your favorite podcasting app or on YouTube to get all of these Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes, as well as all the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We're back Friday with more here on the Steelers, here on the North Shore Drive podcast. We'll see you then.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.